Welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Beth Ann. I'm back after a long sort of unplanned hiatus to pop in with a quick book review of A Simple Scale by David Llewellyn. This is a book that I got as part of the Queer Book Box, which is a British book subscription company focused entirely on queer literature. And one thing I really like about them is that they have multiple different tiers, like most book subscription services do. But one of their tiers is totally simple. It's literally just a book. And so that's the tier I have, and I absolutely love it. And I think it's every 2 months I get a book in the mail from them. And I'm behind. This is the first book from the Queer Book Box that I've read, and I think I've been a subscriber for almost a year now. So one of my goals, to the extent that I have reading goals for 2023, is to catch up a little bit. But all of that aside, I'm really glad that I finally picked this up. This was the first book that I got as part of the Queer Book Box. And this book was a 5-star read from me. Absolutely, hands down. I really, really loved it. So we're following a young woman named Natalie in New York City in the aftermath of 9/11. It's like October, November of 2001. And so we get glimpses of sort of the trauma that she's experienced as a New Yorker who witnessed the attacks happen, and her dealing with that. And she is a personal assistant to an elderly composer named Sol Conrad, who is primarily a classical music aficionado, but in the 1940s, 1950s, there wasn't much work for classical music composers, and so he turned to composing film scores and music for the film industry. And so now that he's quite elderly and he suffers from severe dementia, and he's very wealthy because he sort of made it big. He wrote the hit music, what am I trying to say? He wrote the theme music for a hit TV show in the 1970s that I think basically like set him up for life. And so we get a little glimpse into the life of this wealthy New Yorker. Natalie is his personal assistant. He has a whole team of people who clean and organize things for him. Natalie, however, is a composer and musician herself. And so she got the job as his personal assistant because she actually shares that connection with him. And so we get little glimpses of the relationship that they have through music. And the action of the story starts because quite early on, Natalie fields a call for Sol Conrad, for this composer, from a young man from Russia. And she meets with him. It's a little bit cloak and daggery. She's a little worried. And it turns out that he claims that his grandfather, who was a Russian composer, is actually the one who wrote the music that was used in this hit TV series. So that could totally upend Sol Conrad's life if this came to light. And he actually has a very ancient looking piece of music, like a handwritten, piece of music that he claims is the original of that music. And Natalie, with her musical background, she looks at it, takes one look at it, and is like, this is the exact same music. It's not even like we're talking about two different variations. This is the exact same music. So she's intrigued because Sol Conrad has never been to Russia. The grandfather of the mysterious Russian had never left Russia. And so it's like, what is happening here? Is it sort of a twist of the universe, or did something happen a little bit more sketchily? And the action unfolds from there. So after that first chapter, where we're sort of intrigued with the mystery, we then get alternating chapters from 3 different viewpoints. We continue to get some of Natalie's viewpoint in the main, modern timeline, but then we also get different points of time in Sol Conrad's life and in the time of the Russian composer's life. His name was Sergei Andreevich, I want to say. And then I'm not quite remembering the second part of his name, but anyway, and Sergei. And it's devastating because both of those men, so they were both gay men and they both lived through awful times. So we follow Sergei as Stalin rises to power in the Soviet Union. He ends up in a gulag for 12 years, I want to say. Survives the gulag, goes back to Moscow. So we see like different sort of different stages through that time, and some of them are quite hard to read. Like, this book should come with trigger warnings. But the writing is very sparse. So like, even when there's a tough thing to read, it doesn't last very long, because David Llewellyn, the author, just does like such a good job of like just delivering impact with like these very, yeah, it's just like sparse, beautiful writing, which is sort of my favorite. And it's all about sort of the characters and like what they're feeling and what they're thinking. So yeah, so we follow him through that really tough era. And then we're following Sol Conrad in the 1950s in the music industry. And he's a gay man in California. And so we hear about that scene in the 1950s. But we also, it's the McCarthy era. And so we hear a lot about sort of the fear of being labeled someone who doesn't belong, and that's happening to people. It happens to Sol Conrad's mentor, Ronald Bernard, Ron Bernard, who was a gay composer as well. And they had actually been lovers for quite a long period of time. And so we're also seeing Sol Conrad dealing with his grief, because in the 1950s, we're only a couple years past when Ron Bernard had passed away. And his sort of sadness that he's a classical composer who is now sort of reduced to writing film scores, and sort of dealing with that shift in his life. And part of the tension and plot of the novel is that in this McCarthy era, his mentor, Ron Bernard, gets put on one of those lists. I think they were called the Red List. So he's labeled as a communist. He had been to Russia one time, but he had gone as a ballet critic. And he had gone specifically for like a ballet review to review ballets in Russia. So we see some of that drama unfolding. So there's just all these different things that are connecting, and we get to see the lives of two gay men through very difficult periods of history, and sort of how they dealt with it or failed to deal with it. And then through it all, we get the woman in the modern times, Natalie, who's trying to unravel what happened with this piece of music. So I'm not sure I'm doing it justice, but it's a character-driven book, but there was a lot of really cool plot stuff going on. Like I said, I just thought the writing was absolutely beautiful, and I thought there was a lot of like tough subject matter in here that was just handled with a lot of compassion and grace. Yeah, it's just beautiful. Left me with a lot of sort of open questions about that era in time. It sort of feels like we got peeled back a little bit of some alternate ways of telling the history of these times in these two different regions. It's very different from like what I would read in a textbook. So I just really loved this book. It was a 5-star read. Definitely recommend. I'm super looking forward to the rest of my Queer Book Box books that I accumulated last year, and we'll be trying to get through those. So thanks. I'm hoping to be back periodically with videos. Turns out being a new professor is a lot of work, so I won't necessarily commit myself to anything. Although honestly, the biggest barrier has been, now that I'm not working from home anymore, finding time when I can film in my house. I feel like that's honestly been the biggest barrier, because I don't want to film when like my 5-year-old could come running in at any moment. And I think this semester I'll have a little bit more opportunities for that. So we'll see how it goes. No promises. But I hope to be back with another video soon. I think about all the people that I interact with on BookTube often, and I've really missed watching as much videos, and I've missed posting videos over the past 6 months or so. So thinking of you all and hoping to still be around in this community. Thanks. Bye.